So mine is not a personal talk. It's a commentary on a sutta. It's a commentary on the Dasadhamma Sutta, which I think lots of you will have heard. Just for those of you who want to know where it is, it's in the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 10, Sutta 48. And this translation I'm using is by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, so you can find it online. So it starts, there are these 10 things that a person gone forth should reflect on often. Which 10? So the first thing to note is that this is a practice. It's a practice of reflection. And you find this often in the Pali Canon. The Buddha will be saying to the monks, there are roots of trees, there are empty huts, go, sit, and reflect. And he gives them a list of things to reflect on. This is one of those lists. The other thing to note is that it's to be reflected on again and again. So it's not a practice for once, it's a practice for many, many times. And it is being recommended to those who have made a definite commitment. There is another list elsewhere of 5 things to be reflected on by those who have not gone forth. So it's an appropriate practice within the context of that commitment. So I'm assuming, I suppose, for the purposes of this talk, that order members have gone forth. You could say that there is an effective going forth. That's the flip side of effective going for refuge. And in this teaching, I think what the Buddha is pointing towards is what we could call a real going forth, which is the twin of real going for refuge. So what I'm going to do here is I'll tell you what the sutta says, I'll give a little commentary, and then I'm going to give you a rendering of what the sutta says to make it more applicable to us. So my rendering of the first opening line is, these are 10 things that should be reflected on again and again by an order member. The first one is, I have become casteless. A person gone forth should often reflect on this. So caste obviously is something that's very important in the Indian context. We may if we don't reflect on this, we might skip over this one and think caste doesn't apply to me. Padmavajra was telling us yesterday about a talk that Bhante gave in which he located the origins of caste in the klisto mano vijnana, so in the defiled mind consciousness. So of course, there are lots of things, as it were, that come out of the defiled mind consciousness. And caste is one of those. Caste is a human creation. It's a divisive creation. And it's, of course, a wrong view. In a way, we could say that something like nationhood, nation states, is a similar kind of thing. It's a human creation. And often it can also cause division. So maybe one alternative to casteless would be stateless. Imagine what it would be like to be stateless. So this is about identity. It's about how we create and consolidate our sense of self by identifying strongly with some particular section of humanity. And that section of humanity then becomes us, as opposed to the rest who are them. So it's in this way that we reinforce our delusions. And group identity, like caste, like nations, and lots of other group identities, also perpetuate divisions and sometimes perpetuate hatreds and lead to conflict. So when reflecting on our group identity, it's important to remember this is not about other people's identity with particular groups. Other people's identity with particular groups, particularly if they have not gone forth, if they don't have a spiritual commitment, those identities might be essential or very important to them. So this is a reflection for those who have gone forth. So envy, jealousy, pride, lots of little maras are given fertile ground to breed through our tendency to identify with a group or to identify ourselves as a member of a group. So this is about letting go of group identities, whether they're based on physical characteristics or ideologies or whatever. So, and this first reflection is also, the reflection about caste, is also about how we see and treat other people. So the ideal is to be aware of each other person as a person in their own right, regardless of our views about them or their status in society, and even regardless of what group identity they are attached to. And this, of course, is very difficult to achieve. If we're honest with ourselves, we would probably have to admit that more often than not, we're relating to our interpretation of another person rather than to them in all their complexity. It's difficult to know another person, even those we assume we know well. I've had a very strong personal experience of this. Someone I was a very close friend to for 18 years, another order member, who gave up Buddhism quite suddenly. And this was somebody I thought I knew very well. And I realized it's really difficult to know another person. Of course, it's really difficult to know ourselves. And that's one of the reasons why it's difficult to know another person. They don't know themselves. So my rendering of this first verse is, I no longer hold to any group identity, such as nationality, gender, sexual orientation, family, skin color, class, ethnic origin, the wealthy, the poor, socialist, capitalist, and so on. This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. The second verse is, my life is dependent on others. A person gone forth should often reflect on this. So this second point is about the fact that the lay people feed the bhikkhus because they trust that by feeding those who are pure, they will gain merit. So the bhikkhu is being exhorted to be worthy of that trust and worthy of his free meal. As order members, we become an example of a committed spiritual practitioner, whether we like it or not. We become the fourth sight for others. And this means that we have a certain responsibility thrust upon us. We can be seen, or often we are seen, as representatives of Buddhism, of the Triratna order, and exemplars of going for refuge to the Three Jewels, because we have made a public statement of faith in and commitment to the Three Jewels. And we've made a public statement of confidence in the order as a context for giving expression to that faith and commitment. So whatever we do, if we tell lies, if we swear, if we eat meat, if we drink alcohol, or if we give generously or speak kindly or respond with patience, whatever we do, whatever we say, whatever we write, will reflect on the order and on the Dharma. Also, the verse says, my life is dependent on others. We depend on each other. The order is the context in which we practice, and we trust each other to carry on going for refuge so that the order continues to be a genuine spiritual community. So our spiritual practice, our skillfulness, our unskillfulness, affects the integrity of the order and its effectiveness as a context for others to practice in. So my rendering of this is, others put their trust in me because I have been ordained. I should live and practice in such a way as to be worthy of their trust, their generosity and receptivity. This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. The third verse, the third thing to be reflected on, my behavior should be different from that of householders. A person gone forth should often reflect on this. So if we go forth from group identity and no longer identify ourselves in terms of roles and the norms of the society around us, we will stand out as different. We will hopefully be noticeably more honest, friendly, helpful, straightforward. Our views and behavior will not necessarily be those of the majority. Our views and behavior will not be quite so predictable, not quite so habitual and without subtlety as group views and behavior. And we will be more open to changing what we think when there is reason to. So the world and the views of the world, as it were, the world and its views and its concerns are powerfully impinging on us all the time. And if we permit it, we will be receiving an immersive conditioning in views, attitudes, opinions, and behaviors that are not based on the Dharma. It's quite easy for us to immerse ourselves in the world and in the views of the world, rather than in the Dharma and the views of the Dharma. What's called the slow stain of the world. It's not just our behavior that needs to be different from those who have not gone forth. It's not just our behavior, it's also our communication and even our thinking. So I've rendered this as, I have vowed to live by the 10 precepts. I should observe the precepts so that it is noticeable to others that my behavior, communication, and attitudes are ethical and governed by deeply held principles. This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. The fourth verse is, can I fault myself with regard to my virtue? A person gone forth should often reflect on this. I was thinking this verse, and I think probably some of the others, they reflect this kind of negative bias you sometimes get in the Pali Canon. So you could equally reflect on, can I rejoice in myself with regard to my virtue? It doesn't have to be, can I fault myself? And this reflection is one that we might be tempted only to give a passing thought to, but it's actually quite demanding. It's about being ethically sensitive. So to really become ethically sensitive, we need to quieten, to become more tranquil and equanimous, so that we can look objectively at our own behavior, our own thought patterns, our own communication, and we can assess them candidly. And for many of us, that implies a reduction of input and being more discriminating about what we input into our minds. Bhante has told us about this in his sets of 15 points for order members. So the speed at which we live our lives, the volume of information we take in, and the kind of information we expose ourselves to, all have an impact on our ethical sensitivity. So this reflection is related to hri or hiri, but that word is not mentioned in the text. The word used here is, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, upavadati, which means blame, and also something like to tell secretly against. The idea is that you have your own internal spy, your own internal espionage agent, yeah? That spy or that agent knows what's really going on and can tell you the truth if you're willing to listen. So this is your conscience, yeah? I've noticed sometimes in discussions about ethics with order members that often people like to talk about the ethics of others or the ethics of the order, yeah? I think you might recognize that. But they quite often shy away from scrutinizing their own ethical life too closely. And sometimes this is because people don't know how to go further with ethical practice. Sometimes it might be avoidance. So in this teaching, the Buddha is asking us to have a good look at our ethical lives. And if we do, we may find that we're doing very well, and therefore have a sound foundation to build on and take further. I've been doing some retreats on the 10 precepts, and this is one of the points I've been trying to hammer home to people, is that actually order members, by and large, are very skillful, and we should recognize that and acknowledge it fully, and from there we can go further, yeah? If we don't recognize that and acknowledge it fully, often we're continuing to think of ourselves as people who are more unskillful than we actually are. So I've rendered this one as, how ethically sensitive am I? Am I aware of my conscience being troubled in any way? Could I rejoice in my own ethical sensitivity? This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. Number 5, can my knowledgeable fellows in the holy life on close examination fault me with regard to my virtue? A person gone forward should often reflect on this. So the 5th reflection is about the impression our behavior would make on the rest of the Sangha if they knew about it. So it's referring to apatrapya or ottappa. And this could give rise to further questions. Are there some things that we keep secret from our friends in the order? Do we have the opportunity to confide and confess to friends in the order? Are we willing to be questioned or even admonished by our friends in the order with regard to our observance of the precepts? Could we make greater use of the order to help us to refine our ethical sensitivity and become more skillful? So perhaps a paraphrase of something that Bhante once said about communities might be applied here. Being an order member is an opportunity, not an achievement. In other words, the order is a context in which to practice, and it's only meaningful when we use it in that way. So it's worth noting that these last 3 reflections are all about ethical behavior or skillfulness, which is a reminder, of course, of the 10 precepts, which we vow to uphold at the time of our ordination, and which is a very important practice if our going for refuge is going to blossom into real going for refuge. It's also, incidentally, one of the few practices that's completely common in the order. All order members take on the 10 precepts. So order members may do different meditations, study different texts, and so on, but the 10 precepts is something that unites us completely. And the 10 precepts includes ethics, meditation, and wisdom. And therefore, the 10 precepts are an essential and sufficient practice, which is why they're so central to our ordination. So I've just glossed this as, would other order members or my preceptors be troubled by any of my actions, words, or attitudes if they were aware of them? Or you could add, or would they rejoice in my actions, words, or attitudes if they were aware of them? This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. Number 6, I will grow different, separate from all that is dear and appealing to me. A person gone forth should often reflect on this. So this 6th reflection is about both impermanence and separation. Our attachments are so comfortable and intimate, so much part of who we are, that it's often difficult for us to notice them. The fundamental attachment, of course, is the attachment to self. And we can become aware of that through its grosser manifestations sometimes. But often we simply regard or rationalize our egocentricity with what to us is a completely reasonable conceptualization of our delusions. So arising out of our self-attachment is attachment to possessions, status, groups, and views. And this 6th reflection is encouraging us to let go of our mental and emotional clinging, because the reality is that everything will be snatched from us by impermanence. And this goes to the heart of how we cause ourselves pain. Generosity and a sense of abundance are natural expressions of non-attachment. So I've glossed this as, I will be separated from all that I hold dear, either at death or before. Am I aware of my strong attachments and how they hold me back? This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. Number 7, I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that I will fall heir. A person gone forth should often reflect on this. So the 7th reflection reminds us that we can rely on the law of karma. All of our skillful actions, such as our meditation or devotion, will definitely have consequences, and we will experience the fruits of our efforts. If we want to experience contentment and happiness or become wise, we just need to set up the conditions and undertake the actions that are appropriate, and the consequences will follow. In spite of knowing this in theory, I have always found myself surprised when I do actually experience the results of persistent practice. But it is what happens. I've glossed this as, I experience the consequences of my own actions of thought, word, and deed, good and bad. I should not depend on others for my contentment, and I should not blame others for my dissatisfaction. This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. Number 8, what am I becoming as the days and nights fly past? A person gone forth should often reflect on this. Shakespeare has Richard II say, I wasted time, and now time doth waste me. So this is perhaps one of the most challenging of these reflections. And there are 2 aspects to this reflection. Firstly, there is the relentless passing of time, taking us rapidly to the edge of a cliff where we cannot stop or pause, but are pushed onwards to plunge into whatever arises in dependence upon the conditions we are setting up as time races relentlessly on. And that brings us to the second part of the reflection: how are we spending our time? Or to put it another way, what conditions are we setting up? What are our minds engaged with predominantly? What is the usual tenor of our emotions? What do we do most of the time? How do we express ourselves verbally? What effect do we have on other people? Do we notice the effect on us of the internet, TV, radio, shopping, our conversations, our reading, and so on? Are we content or restless? So these are reflections that can lead us to further reflections on the nature of the spiritual path, the discipline needed, the motivations that drive us, and how strong our commitment to the three jewels is ongoingly. And these could be very challenging reflections and also very rewarding. They can take us into depth from the starting point of our very mundane activities. My rendering of that is: the days and nights pass without pause. How do I spend my time? This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. Number 9, do I delight in an empty dwelling? A person gone forth should often reflect on this. So this is about spending time in solitude. It could also be seen as being about meditation. Whether we delight in solitude or not, it is necessary to have some solitude if this practice of reflection is going to be effective. My own experience, which is obviously limited, is that I don't think I could continuously go for refuge effectively unless I have time away on solitary retreat every year. Solitude is a very clear mirror which shows us who we are in fine detail. And this self-knowledge is the essential fuel of our spiritual progress. So solitude is not simply a matter of being alone. Being alone comes easy to introverts. Solitude as a spiritual practice is about looking into our hearts and minds unflinchingly, seeing what is there, both the good and the bad, owning it as our own, and learning about the next steps on the spiritual path. It's about reflecting on our life in the light of the Dharma and allowing the Dharma to permeate and shape our lives. And my rendering of that is: in solitude, I can become deeply aware of myself, my habits, my conscience, and my spiritual progress. Do I spend sufficient time in solitude? This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. And finally, number 10, have I attained a superior human attainment, a truly noble distinction of knowledge and vision, such that when my fellows in the holy life question me in the last days of my life, I won't feel abashed? A person gone forth should often reflect on this. So the 10th reflection imagines someone who is dying with just a short time left to live. And they are asked by others in the Sangha what all their years of practice have amounted to. What has it all meant? What is there to show for it? Have they evolved to a state of consciousness that is higher or more refined or more insightful than that of ordinary folk who have not taken up Dharma practice? Have they experienced some liberation from craving, ill will, and delusion? So there are two aspects again to this reflection. What has happened as a result of all the years of spiritual practice, and am I aware of what has happened? So just as at the beginning of the path, there is dukkha and awareness of dukkha, at every stage of the path, there is the breaking of the bonds that bind us to the wheel, and there is the knowledge of the destruction of those bonds. So awareness of the fruits of practice at every stage along the way is a source of inspiration for further practice. And as order members, we can gain encouragement from what we have established so far and build on what is positive and insightful in our lives, rather than worrying about what we have not yet achieved. So I've glossed that as, am I aware of the fruits of my spiritual practice? Could I say that I have become more aware, kind, confident, wise, positive, compassionate, and free? This should be reflected on again and again by an order member. And the sutta ends by saying, these are the 10 things that a person gone forth should reflect on often. Or, in my words, these are the 10 things to be reflected on again and again by one who is effectively going for refuge to the 3 jewels.